Any questions about urinary? We don't talk a lot about embryology in here because there's just no time. There's just no time. So, all I really want you to know in terms of how is it determined whether you are a male or a female, okay, depends on whether you're expressing a certain gene on a certain chromosome, okay? So around week 17, just FYI, is when you can diagnose the sex of the fetus, okay? So most of us by default start off as female, okay? We start off as XX, and it's only if a Y chromosome is expressed, okay, by this single gene that your pathway then heads down a male route. Okay, so this picture is just kind of showing you undifferentiated gender. Okay, so we don't know, male or female. It hasn't been determined yet. It's only 5 weeks. Okay, so if you express a gene on your Y chromosome, okay, then you're going to go down the male path. And now all of a sudden those stem cells are going to form a glans penis, okay? If you don't express that gene on your Y chromosome and you stay XX, then you're going to start to form a glans clitoris, okay? So it just depends on whether or not you get a gene that's expressed on that Y chromosome that determines whether you're going down that male pathway. Otherwise, the default is to go down the female pathway. That's all I want you to know. We're not learning genetics here. That is not my specialty, okay? So just simple concept, that's it. Okay. All right, as far as sex organs go, okay, I already told you guys this in lab, but the main primary sex organ in males is what? The testes, okay? It's not the penis. Because the testes are the sperm factories, and in females it's ovaries that produces the eggs, okay? So everything else is considered an accessory sex organ for males and females, okay? So gonads, which is testes in male, ovaries in female, they're going to secrete hormones, okay? But they're also going to secrete gametes, right? So testes are going to secrete sperm, ovaries are going to secrete eggs, but they also each can secrete hormones. So they're endocrine and exocrine, okay? Okay, so let's focus on guys. So the first bullet is pretty much the pathway of sperm, okay? Starts in the testes, goes to the epididymis, into the ductus deferens, out the ejaculatory duct, into the urethra, okay, out the tip of the penis. And we're specifically talking about the different parts of the urethra too, right, for a male, because there's 3 different parts. Okay. So the accessory glands for a male include what you guys identified in lab: seminal vesicle, prostate gland, bulbourethral glands. So now we got to find out what is their purpose. Why do you guys have them? Okay. So let's talk about the main sperm factory first, the testes. Okay. So we know that they produce hormones, mainly testosterone, and sperm. Okay. They have several membranes on top of them. Okay. In lab, the white outer covering of the testes, okay, is called the tunica albuginea. Okay, that's the fibrous capsule of the testes. Okay, but superficial to that, we have a serous membrane. It's called the tunica vaginalis. So you have an outer parietal layer and an inner visceral layer. Okay, so 2 layers here, and in between those 2 layers is a cavity. Okay. And the cavity of the tunica vaginalis is filled with what? Fluid, right? And it's used to reduce what? Friction. Because the testes are housed in an encasement or in a covering called the scrotum, right? And I'll say it now, but I'll say it again and again, is sperm are very temperature sensitive. So we don't want friction. We don't want to raise temperature, okay? All right. So each testes, okay, has lobules in it. And those lobules contain those seminiferous tubules that you guys looked at under the microscope. The tubules is where the sperm is made, okay? So, from the tubules, okay, so all the yellow inside the testes are all those seminiferous tubules. Then sperm enters a structure called the ready testes. Okay. Then from the ready testes, it enters the efferent ductule, which tells you it's going away from the testes, and it's entering epididymis. Okay. So we're just talking about sperm here. We're not talking about fluid. We're not talking about semen. We're just talking about sperm here. This is just sperm. Okay. Okay. So now, in lab under the microscope, you guys had to identify Sertoli cells, or sustentacular cells, right? There are other cells, okay, in the testes that are surrounding the seminiferous tubule. So they're outside the tubule. Those are called interstitial cells, in between the tissue. Interstitial cells, okay. So each of these cells responds to a hormone that's secreted by the anterior pituitary gland, okay. What does LH stand for? Luteinizing hormone. So now we know where luteinizing hormone targets. Specifically, okay, the interstitial cells of the testes. Before we just said gonads. Now we know specifically where. The interstitial cells in the testes. And it's going to tell those cells to secrete testosterone. Little estrogen, but not as much. Testosterone. Okay. And testosterone is going to maintain male sex characteristics. Okay. Okay, so then the sustentacular cells are under the influence of a different hormone that's secreted by the anterior pituitary gland called what? Follicle stimulating hormone. And those follicle stimulating hormone is going to tell the follicles, the germ cells, which are ultimately going to become sperm, to grow and develop. Follicle stimulating. Okay, so it tells those little cells, continue to grow. I will help you. Feed off of me, and you will be fine, okay? Okay. All right. So all this is just a visual. Okay, it's just showing you visually where things are coming from. Here's anterior pituitary. We got follicle stimulating and luteinizing. Luteinizing is going to the interstitial cells. Here's the membrane of a seminiferous tubule. Okay, so here's the outside membrane of a seminiferous tubule. Here's the inside. Here's the sperm. Okay, so those interstitial cells are outside the tubule. In between each of the tubules is where you find those. Those cells are then going to be stimulated to secrete testosterone to maintain male sex characteristics, okay? Follicle stimulating hormone is going to go straight into the Sertoli or sustentacular cells that are in the seminiferous tubules, basically in the cell wall of the tubules. And it's going to tell those sperm, continue to grow. Let me help you. That's all this picture is, just kind of giving you a visual from pituitary down to seminiferous tubules. Okay? Okay. All right. So, some other things here. The scrotum, okay, we know is the sac that houses the two testes. Now, the testes are located outside a male's body for a reason, because it keeps sperm cool. On average, about 3 degrees cooler than your body temperature. Sperm are very temperature sensitive, okay? So we have two muscles, okay, that we didn't identify in lab, but we're gonna learn them now. The dartos muscle and the cremaster muscle. The dartos muscle surrounds the scrotum, so it's located within the walls of the scrotum. Okay, so deep to the scrotal sac, you'll find the dartos muscle. You can't see it on this picture because it's cut, and they just didn't give you that layer. Okay, but it's just deep to the scrotum. And what the dartos muscle can do is the dartos muscle can either stretch the skin of the scrotum and provide a cooling environment for the testes, okay? Or the dartos muscle can relax and kind of cinch together and increase the thickness of the scrotal sac to increase temperature, should that be necessary, okay? In addition, you've got the cremaster muscle, which is longitudinal bands that go all the way down, up and down the length of, what is this structure called?
Spermatic cord.
The spermatic cord, okay? And so when the cremaster muscle contracts, okay, it can elevate the testes and bring it closer to the body to increase temperature, should it be necessary, of course, closer to your core body. Or the cremaster muscle can reflexively relax and drop the testes away from the body and reduce the temperature. Okay. Okay. All right. Now, as far as the inguinal canal is concerned, okay, all I want you to know is that right around your hip crease, okay, you have a ligament. And the ligament is circular, and it allows for a canal. And that canal allows for testicular artery, testicular vein, nerves, lymphatic vessels to leave the male's abdominal cavity, okay, and enter the outside via the spermatic cord, okay? Just ignore this second bullet. You don't need to know all that superficial ring and all that bit, okay? But because it's a canal, all right, kind of like the esophageal hiatus, if the canal is too large, or maybe some stress has been applied to it, heavy lifting, construction work, whatnot, part of your digestive system might want to squeak into that canal. And this example here on the left-hand side of this specimen is showing you a bit of intestine that wants to go into that canal. That's called an inguinal hernia. Ouch. Okay. Usually what they do for that is, because it'll just get worse over time, is they resect back the intestine and they put like a steel cage at the top of the spermatic cord. They'll insert like a steel cage, kind of as like a blockade, to prevent organs from wanting to go through that opening. Okay. All right. Okay, so that takes us to the spermatic cord, which again houses the cremaster muscle, lymphatic vessels, the ductus deferens, your testicular arteries, and your testicular veins. Once they enter the spermatic cord, they're called what? What are they called? Pampiniform plexus. Okay. Why do we have why do guys have a pampiniform plexus? Well, because arterial blood coming in from the testicular artery is hot. Sperm don't like that. Sperm are traveling in the opposite direction up the ductus deferens. So, let's create a web-like distribution of venous blood surrounding that testicular artery and ductus deferens to cool down the temperature, because venous blood is cooler. So that's why you have a pampiniform plexus in the spermatocord, right? With structure comes function. And then you have nerves. Okay, we already know that ejaculation and erection is sympathetic and parasympathetic respectively. We already learned that in the last unit. Okay. Okay, it's all about temperature for the sperm. Okay, epididymis. Head, body, tail, we know. So we've got pseudostratified columnar epithelium in the epididymis. It takes about 3 weeks for sperm to travel through the epididymis, and this is where they learn how to swim. Okay, so they get an education on how to swim and how to fertilize an egg. So sperm are made in the testes, but they're stored in the epididymis. So sperm are ejaculated from the epididymis, not the testes. Okay, so if sperm that's living in the epididymis never gets ejaculated, it just gets reabsorbed. The epididymis can reabsorb it, break it down and get rid of it. All right, the ductus deferens, okay, also called the vas deferens. We know from lab that it joins with the seminal vesicle to form the ejaculatory duct, nothing new there. The ejaculatory duct empties into the prostate gland to form the prostatic urethra. It's still got ciliated columnar, again, to move sperm. Okay, so there's a muscularis layer. Again, smooth muscle waves, moves the sperm through the tube, because again, the tube, you're going against gravity, you gotta head upwards, okay, from the testes to the penis. Nothing new here, the urethra, 3 different parts, okay? But we have to remember that it's either going to carry semen, which is sperm plus fluid, or urine, but not both at the same time, okay? So it has a dual responsibility. Okay, I'll talk about a couple of the reasons why. Okay, so let's talk about some of the accessory glands and what they're used for. So the seminal vesicles secretes about 60% of the volume of semen. So seminal vesicles is going to give you about 60% fluid that we're adding to the sperm that's coming in from the ductus deferens. Okay, and that fluid contains sugars to nourish the sperm because they have a long journey. They have to exit a male reproductive system and enter a female reproductive system. And then there's other substances like immune suppressants, sperm mobility enhancers, enzymes for clotting, because you want sperm, when they enter a female's reproductive system, i.e. the vagina, you don't want sperm to just fall right back out. So within the fluid, you have clotting factors so that sperm enters a vaginal canal and can kind of hold on and clot. And then prostaglandins actually cause contractions of the uterus in a female. And the uterus kind of tells the sperm, hey, come on in. Okay, because again, the whole point of a reproductive system is to reproduce. So you're going to have multiple avenues designed to help it succeed, and prostaglandins is part of that, causing uterine contractions within a female to move sperm up the vaginal canal into the cervix, ultimately into the uterus. And it's not done there. Sperm still have to go into the fallopian tubes all the way down to the ampulla for a possible fertilization. We'll talk more about that when we talk about females. But sperm have a long journey, so they need assistance. Prostaglandins help with that. Okay, the prostate is going to give you pretty much the remainder of the fluid, okay, to assist sperm. Okay, and it's going to be clotting factors, little sperm mobility enhancers, just think of them as little steroids that allow sperm to swim better and longer okay? There's also liquefaction factors in ejaculated semen because, again, you want sperm to clot, but you don't want them to stay there. You want them to then liquefy and continue to be able to move. Okay, so there's gonna be that like blend of clotting factors and liquefaction, so that sperm can continue to move on their journey. Males, as they get older, they can undergo blood testing periodically, and they can check a specific antigen in your body called prostate-specific antigen, PSA. And that, if that antigen becomes elevated, that can be a screening tool for prostate cancer. So my dad had that. He had elevated PSAs. They were keeping an eye on him for prostate cancer. He already had an enlarged prostate. His prostate was like the size of a grapefruit, which explained to me why he constantly felt like he had to go to the bathroom. So he ended up taking medication in an attempt to shrink the prostate. But in all of the examinations, they determined that he had cancer. But prostate cancer, of the cancers, if you want to get cancer as a male, prostate's the one to get because it stays localized to the prostate. And it typically can be managed with just medication and monitoring. It's not something where you have to have chemo. You don't have to have your prostate removed. It all depends on the age of the male and what they choose to do. But it's a very manageable cancer. So my dad had it for probably 10, 20 years of his life, and he didn't have to have surgery. We didn't do any kind of radiation or chemo. We just monitored his PSA. He got testosterone shots every once in a while, and he was taking medication for it. All right. Okay. Accessory glands. Bulbourethral. Bulbourethral, little guy, okay? But he's important because he's going to secrete a mucus, okay? Kind of like a bicarbonate mucus that's neutral, and it's going to cleanse the urethra seconds before ejaculation, right? Because in the urethra, you could have remnants of urine, and urine is very acidic. That can kill sperm. So the bulbourethral gland is going to secrete a mucus. Some people can call that pre-ejaculate. Sure. You know, it's the mucus just prior to ejaculation. Again, to protect sperm from coming in contact with potentially acidic urine. Okay? So it keeps the pH of the urethra neutral. Okay. All right. Last but not least, for the accessory glands is the penis. So again, it's basically just the conduit with which a male can use to insert sperm into a female reproductive system, all for the ultimate goal of reproduction. So we've identified most of the structures here in lab already. The glands, the prepuce, circumcision, again, is the procedure that you have done when you have foreskin removed. Most males in the States have had circumcision, but there are men out there that haven't. And that doesn't mean that they're necessarily less cleanly than anybody else, okay? Those males just have to take a little bit more time to make sure that they can clean the area in between the prepuce and the glands, because there's going to be kind of like invagination of the skin if there's a foreskin. And if you don't, you can develop like bacterial collections, if you will, because you know you're constantly sloughing off epithelial cells, okay, from your skin. So that can accumulate with oils and such that can form a substance called smegma. Just the sound of it doesn't sound good. But that's only, right, that only forms if something is not paid attention to, so to speak, if you're not quaffing yourself on a regular basis. Okay. Last slide here, and then I'll stop. Okay, so the penis, again, has arteries, nerves, veins, okay, and it has two erectile bodies, corpus spongiosum, corpus cavernosum, okay. The cavernosum has an artery that runs within each part of it, okay, so the two on top here are the cavernosum. Underneath here is the spongiosum, which is where you have the spongy urethra, and I'm sorry, any South Park fans here? This just looks like Cartman, I'm sorry, but it just does. And I can't get that out of my head. So anyways, okay, moving on from that. What else? That's it. We already covered all that, everything else.